All right. Welcome back to Summer of Drawing. And this is class number 18, All Media, Folds, and Animals. And I know that the note that got sent around this morning said something about using colored paper or toned paper. And that was because, well, earlier in the summer, when I made up the list, I was going to wait to use toned paper until the end of the summer. And of course, that didn't happen. I was so excited to show you how it could be used. I started early. So I will be talking a little bit about that today, but I'm sure that most of you who are already working with toned paper have some ideas of how to apply it. But just to be on the safe side, I will show you some examples. Let's see. Okay, so when we think about drawing folds, we tend to think of something like this, a rather classic looking study draped folds. You can see, the planes of the fold. You can see, the plane where the light hits it. And then as you got the drop off, the fabric goes down towards the ground. You have a darker value. And then of course you've got the darkest value where the shadows are. And this is what people tend to think of classically. I want to show you some kind of different stuff today, things about how to use folds and fabric to add action and energy to your drawings. Now, I did want to include this because I came across this Antony Van Dyke drawing, which I thought was hilarious. It's a mixed media, black chalk, gray wash, pen, and brown ink. And what I think is wonderful about it is this description that came with it. Van Dyke shows the artist, who is known for his difficult personality, looking out at the viewer in a surly manner. So I just thought this was marvelous. It has less to do with folds and just really a great drawing. But at the same time, the folds are pretty simple. And he is, using the dark underneath the fabric at the bottom with the hand to show, just sort of, point your direction to the hand itself and the gesture. But everything else is really simplified. You're just looking at this fellow and his rather surly expression. I thought that was marvelous. All right, so just a little bit on toned paper as we get started. One of the benefits when it comes to drawing fabric and drawing folds, in fact, drawing in general, is that your toned paper, your paper color, gets to be the color of whatever it is. So, the scene in general, the fabric that you're working with, it doesn't matter. And you can spend your time worrying only about the darkest parts, the shading and the values that are, that are darker, where the light is not hitting the fabric as head on. And also the shadows from where light is completely hidden. So in both of these examples, you can see the highlights are treated with white. Everything else that needs to be said is treated with whatever your drawing instrument is. But it certainly means that fabric and things like that it's possible to draw them a lot faster if you're using toned paper. And you can also use toned paper and charcoal, different media to give different impressions. So over here on the left, we've got what looks like a fabric maybe a little bit heavier of a weight than a sheet. It has a lot of folds in it, a lot of reflection, and so you get the feeling that it isn't a thick, heavy fabric. Whereas on the right, you do get a feeling of either heavy satin or a wool or something like that has some sheen to it, but is bulky. Those folds are not anywhere near as distinct as over on the left. So very different kinds of textures can be shown using any kind of drawing, but particularly on toned paper, when you're really only worrying about the dark areas and the light areas. And the paper itself is taking care of the local color. Now, local color is a term I used over the last couple of classes, and it really just describes, we think of a yellow lemon and a red apple, and maybe this cloak is purple, who knows? But the paper color itself is standing in for whatever the actual color in the scene is. And we're just talking about lights and darks here. So types of folds. I mentioned that I was going to talk about this. We are not going to get really in depth on this. There are a bunch of different types of folds, and George Bridgman's Complete Drawing from Life has a lot of information about this. So diaper folds are kind of 2-point folds. We saw a 1-point fold last week with the towels. There are zigzag folds that sort of describes what you see in the cloth, and that usually happens sort of, you know, as you're bending your arm, but maybe you haven't got a tight bend yet. Pipe folds are the sorts of things you see in a very full skirt when it's falling down. Spiral folds happen when you've got gathered fabric sort of falling to the ground. A drop fold can be a 1-point fold where the rest of it is just sort of, you know, on the floor. And then inert. Inert is that business of the fabric just wanting to be flat on the floor. And a half lock, you'll see that in a lot of drapery, where there are these interesting sort of, it's kind of like a zigzag fold, but you've got, the fabric can't fall all the way down because another part of the fabric is stopping it. So this is exactly as much as I'm going to tell you about all of these different types of folds, because there's a ton of information out there about that. And really, in a sense, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's good to know about these things, good to understand and hear these terms and be able to look for the different types of folds. But even if you never had seen this page before, you would still be able to draw folds if you observed them correctly for lights and darks, had a little bit of understanding about plane changes perhaps, or at least were able to observe how light falls on things, lights a particular surface fully because a light can be received fully, darker values as planes change and fall away from the light, and then the darkest values where the light can't get to. This is just a matter of observation. So here's a question that a lot of people have, and this is probably more important than all of those names of folds, and that is, how many folds do you draw? So here's a rule of thumb for you. And you can see here on this fellow here in all these various different poses, there are a lot of folds, right? You could spend a ton of time, especially with all those folds around the creased, you know, the pushed up sleeves and all of that kind of thing. You could spend a ton of time drawing all of these folds. Fine to do that if you want to, but it's not necessary to actually show what's going on. So if you look at, you know, you can look at any of these pictures of these fellows, different shirts, different materials. You know, some have more creases because of the type of material they are. Down in the lower left, less creases because of more bulky fabric. Thinner fabric up at the top left where he has the long sleeve gray shirt on. If you go from the point of view of saying, when I do a fold, I'm going to try to use the least number, show the least number of folds in fabric that I can. What would happen if I only picked one fold to show? Or, okay, maybe that's not enough. Maybe I could do 2 or maybe 3. So what happens on, for example, on a fellow with his sleeves pulled up like that? Probably 3 folds, 3 of the most distinct folds that show the sleeve is pushed up would do the trick. Under the arm, probably only 1 fold needed to be shown. You know, as this big kind of a loop that you see there, you can count that as 1 fold and it's done. Likewise, if you go across the upper right, you can see as he's sort of pulling away, you can see a couple of folds going across the chest. 1, maybe 2 of those are necessary, maybe 3, but not all 6 or 7 and all the small ones you see as well. So this is something to keep in mind, because what it means is, you're going to love this, you need to squint. If you squint and look at who you're drawing or the picture you're drawing, you've got a person in front of you, you can do the same thing. Which are the most dominant folds? And which are the folds that seem to tell you what the action is? So even if someone is standing there, but they've got their sleeves pushed up, the action is the pushed up sleeves, right? How many folds are you going to need to actually convey that idea? So fabric type affects texture and folds as well. You know, whether it's a soft fabric, whether it's shiny, whether it's fluffy, whether it's crisp, all of these things change how the folds look. And there isn't sort of a formulaic way of saying, okay, you know, you're doing a sweater, now put fluff that looks like this. what you do instead is you decide, I need to draw in a softer manner. Those folds are not as distinct. I don't have the darks and lights there in the sweater that I do perhaps in even in the sweatshirt on the far right. I just am not getting that depth of darkness. So therefore, softer drawing materials, perhaps charcoal or pencil that's done in a lighter manner, perhaps a little bit more smudging. That's the sort of thing that's going to get you to that look. Whereas for the satin, the dark and the light and those quick changes, right? The quick change of dark and light and reflected light, those indicate sharper folds. And likewise on the sort of crisp tunic top that you see, the shirt top you see on the woman further to the right, there's a crispness and an angularity there, which you don't see in the sweatshirt. So when you're trying to get across the feeling of fabric and of folds, the type of fabric is important to try to convey. And you do that by how you draw those folds. Are they sharper? Are they softer? And also the drawing materials that you select to do that, or smudging, not smudging, hatching, not hatching, all of that sort of thing, angularity or roundness, to get that feeling of the forms across. So we're going to just take a quick detour, and I know a few of you have familiar with this particular illustrator already by name, and if you're not, I'm sure you've seen some of his artwork before. So Albert Dorn was a very well-known illustrator particularly in the 40s, 50s, 60s. His artwork was everywhere. And the reason I'm showing you his work today is he excelled at using fabric and folds to get this sense of energy. And so a lot of his work he was doing, of course, was from photo reference and from the imagination. He was drawing scenes, he was drawing advertising, but he really punched up that feeling of direction and form and action. I'm going to show you a bunch of his artwork, and we're going to go through this pretty quickly because I want to get to the drawing part where you get to do some drawing. Of course, this will be included in the PDF, and you'll be able to go back and look later. But if you start to have a look at his artwork, he was also one of the founders, or the founder of the what was the official name of it? The hang on a second, the Famous Artist School, for which there were ads in the papers and the magazines where art instruction was given, and other artists such as Norman Rockwell became instructors. People could do these sort of correspondence courses. But what I loved about the illustrations that he did, both within that class but also within his advertising, was just the way the folds sort of echoed what was going on. So here we have this woman, she is done for. That birthday party is killing her. And you can see it in the way that everything droops, even the drapery on the chair, even the cushion, everything about her clothing sort of falls downwards. Here we've got an illustration. The name of it is Six Greedy Loafers. And on the right, you can see his quick sketch he did. These people, these young men are all, or middle-aged men are all watching, hoping for the father or the elderly figure to die, and watching him on his deathbed. So rather gruesome, but wonderful illustration where you have all these sort of vulture-like faces around, and also all of these great folds in the fabric, all of these different ways these men are leaning over, and the folds and the direction that he decided to draw them in, elaborate, definitely, but also really important to the way the scene looks. So, when you think of my little rule of thumb of 1, 2, or 3 folds, Dorn did not follow that. He used these folds as a real source of movement. At the same time, he could do a more simple version. Here are a couple of his sketches. And of course, the cloth of somebody who's standing, looking important, perhaps a little bit portly, the fellow putting the hat on his head, everything is a little bit crisper and sharper. Even the points of the shoes, everything is more crisp. There aren't so many folds. The fabric is not to look as worn. Whereas the fellow over here on the right who's lifting something, all the energy of the body is being shown not through, muscles that are revealed or tight clothing, but through the fabric itself. The action, you've got the expression on his face, but you've also got the exaggerated action of the form and the clothing. So this is something that you may have seen illustrations like this that Dorn did. These were a series for Wurlitzer, and he was very good at showing this kind of mid-century aspirational living. You know, people didn't necessarily live like this, but just as we have aspirational TV shows and magazines and such right now showing us how we could be, his illustrations really brought that out. But note the wonderful clothing and how, once again, you've got action, you've got turning, lifting, you've got all of these different textures indicating, this good life, this happy life, all of these people, living well thanks to Wurlitzer. And then he also did war posters, such as this one on the left, which I thought was really appropriate, which came out in 1945. Me travel, not this summer, vacation at home. Not that everyone did that this year. But once again, fabric folds, relaxing. Even the chair looks like it's relaxing. The thingies, the poofies got his shoes on are relaxing. Whereas over here on the right, you've got the energetic reporter, the energetic, camera fellow. They're out there, and all of the clothing emphasizes and re-emphasizes the form and the direction. So one of the reasons I'm showing all of this to you is that even if you have someone who's sitting very still, or someone who's walking, or someone who is running, you can, as an artist, exaggerate all of that movement just a little, or as much as you want to, or you can do it like Dorn and really go for it to tell the story. Now, oftentimes you hear someone say, what is the story you're trying to tell? Draw something and tell your story. And you might be sitting there going, I'm not telling a story. I'm just drawing a picture of an interesting looking guy. But what is that guy doing? Is he drinking his coffee? Is he having a quiet moment? Is he brooding? Is he happy? Is he just reading? Is he introspective? All of those emotions can be reinforced by the action of folds and clothing. So here we have two different scenes. One is, okay, the happy youngsters are dancing. And now if you were really to dance, it would take a lot of energy to make your jeans look like that young man on the right there, to get to get that sort of, but doesn't that really show the energy and action of this particular scene? No doubt what Dorn's trying to get across here. And then over here on the right, you've got the more upper class people, you've got the longer lines, you've got the more elegant look, you've got the people are not crumpled looking necessarily. They're, everything has a sort of a drape to it. So when you talk about drawing folds and trying to simplify, as I mentioned last week, sculptors definitely simplify. This is a particular statue that is outside of the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. And this particular sculptor definitely simplified the folds that were falling here. I thought this is really wonderful. If you're curious, what is past is prologue is what the motto says underneath the sculpture. And I have a little bit of information over here. It's from the Tempest. So this will be included in the PDF that gets sent around. But what's interesting to me is how the folds, unlike Dorn's, in this case are boiled down to the essence. We just want that feeling of drapery. We just need only so many to show, this kind of some sort of underskirt or something going on. You can see by the left foot, that has more detail to it. Whatever's on top has less detail, but still tells the story. So you don't have to have a whole bunch of folds like Dorn, but you can choose to if you think it's useful. So here, for example, in this particular photo, obviously these people are very hot and tired and they're in the desert. You get the idea. This is a stock photo, by the way. This isn't just somebody out in the desert that I photographed. But if you were to draw this, you can see how exaggerating the length and the fall of the folds and the, not only that, the slump of the shoulders, all of that goes to reinforce the story that's being told. Now, let's just go to some dance pictures for a while here, because this is the opposite. So here you've got, on the far left, you've got fabric at rest, right? You've got lots of folds, and there are so many of them that they're getting in the way of each other, but they're still draping downwards. These are basically those pipe folds that were described earlier. In the middle, you've got activity. And now you've got, not only is the fabric itself moving around and it has action, but if you look at her upper body, there's a movement to the torso, right and left. There's stretching and pulling on the arms that give a little bit more indication of what's going on. So you could draw this without having any of that detail in, but it's so much easier to get the feeling of actual movement if you're drawing those folds as well. And then over here on the right, you've got it's sort of half and half. There's not quite as much activity as when she's actually dancing, but you've just still got this stretch that's going on there around the hips and the thighs to tell you that some actual movement is taking place. Someone asked, when simplifying the folds, should you choose the ones with the highest contrast? That is absolutely where I would start. And that is why, when it comes to squinting, for example, if you squint right now at all of these different women twirling, you can see that some of these folds, some of these shapes are more distinct than others. And those are, when I was quoting Mike Hernandez the other week, go for what you see, what's obvious. And that is definitely where I start. And then you decide, well, gosh, maybe I need a few more to really show what's going on. So, if you get to 3 and you feel like you haven't shown everything, that's perfectly fine. But the idea is that rather than, okay, let's take the lady over on the left, rather than starting, on one side and showing every single change in that fabric, is it all of that necessary? Could some of that be a little bit simplified? Because really what we're trying to do is get that sweep, the swirl and the sweep that's going on. The same with the woman in the white dress. By the way, if you go online and you Google like women twirling or women, I think there was another word I used as well, but it's hilarious how many pictures there are of women twirling in dresses. So I guess it's a thing we're supposed to do. But these are mostly professional dancers or models who are actually moving here. And then I showed the woman on the left because even though her fabric is in motion, it's still basically at rest. So she is herself contorted enough that you've got some good folds, but there isn't the activity, there isn't the sort of the dynamic type of fold that you see in the other 3. So once again, if you squint at these, you can obviously see there are some very strong movements. I would start with those, not worry about the others till you really feel you need it. Now, these are Morris dancers. I wanted to make sure the men got their due as well, which is a British folk dancing, mostly male, although there are women who have their own troops and also who dance with the men's troops. That's a whole issue in and of itself. But I wanted to show these because it's a very active and physical type of dancing. And you can see from the there's leaping, there's thrusting with handkerchiefs, there's combat, and then they're sort of jumping up and down. They have bells they strap around their calves and it makes noise. There's usually someone on either a fiddle or a concertina playing music. It's really quite festive, and it's usually done near pubs for money, for beer. It's sort of a tradition. But if you look at these, you can look at those, the folds, like under the arms stretching up, under the legs as they're raised up, the pull forward as they're going, to bat each other. This kind of exaggerated looking at the folds, if you were to draw that and you wanted to get that feeling of the energy of these men out there doing this country dancing in these heavy boots, making all this noise, that's where you would look. You would look, to the form itself, to the people themselves, but then you would look to emphasize it with all of this fold stuff. Now, here's the opposite, right? Now folds are, they're once again echoing the form, but in this particular case, it's a form of tiredness, closure, depression, all of that sort of thing. And the folds don't have that energy. They don't have that excitement and all of that. They're pulling down, they're echoing the form. So these are the sorts of things to keep in mind when you're actually doing a drawing. What is it? What's going on? What are you trying to say? What's the story you're trying to tell? And in this case, all of these people tired, depressed, down, whatever it would happen to be, the clothing itself is already giving you some clues, and then you can exaggerate that just a little bit. Make sure that the folds that you show are the ones that emphasize what's going on. Now, you don't have to use a lot of lines, okay? Dorn used a lot of lines. He did some great stuff. But James Montgomery Flagg used very, very few lines, but they were in the right place. So look, if you look over here at the fellow on the far left, only one, and then just a tiny little second fold in the arm. You can hardly even see the distinction between the arm and the rest of the jacket. Those are lost edges, if you remember that from earlier. And then the fellow in ink over here. I mean, everything isn't even joined up around the edges, is it? But we still know what's going on. So to a certain extent, how many folds you use when you use them, I would experiment around and see for the style that you're drawing in, what is appropriate. You may have a style that's more like James Montgomery Flagg's pen work that requires very little. Also, here's another illustrator who is very prominent in 50s, 60s, Austin Briggs, and he had a messier style of drawing, but it still told the story, didn't it? You know, you can no doubt who's folded over, who's sitting back, you know, who's a little contrapposto with the woman who's coming up the stairs here. All of this is still being told without it having to be very shaded, very soft. All right, so now finally we get to do some drawing of folds. So what I'd like you to do, and this is obviously going to take longer than the time that we'll have in the class. I'd like to spend about 10 minutes on this, but what I want you to do is not worry about the texture so much. What I'd like you to do is concentrate on a line work of this person. Don't even worry about her face or hands or any of that. Concentrate completely on the kimono and what's going on here. Look at the direction of the action, and then very quickly draw this kimono with her underneath to the extent that you need to satisfy your own artistic desire. But what I'm looking for instead is for you to accentuate the movement that you see by having the fabric be a little exaggerated. Perhaps those folds be a little exaggerated, and doing the shading that you need to also emphasize that kind of movement. So keep it simple. You can see sort of what's going on here, but you can also see that there's an opportunity to get really, really complex if you wanted to. So instead of that, I would just, you know, like I said, we're just going to take, you know, 5-10 minutes to do this. What can be accomplished to get your point across? So if you think of Dorn, or if you think of Flagg or any of these the other illustrators, you can even you know, think of something like Austin Briggs, where the movement is pretty continual to get that feeling of form and shape. This is an interesting pose right here, I think, because part of it is sort of quiet. It isn't action like, you know, jumping across the stage is action. At the same time, the fabric itself extends a movement in a way that you really do want to accentuate. If you were going, you know, if you took away those folds of fabric, you know, sort of flowing away, it wouldn't be anywhere as dynamic an image as this one is. So go ahead and draw on this. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to take a minute to review my notes, because I've got some things I'm going to share with you while you're working on this. So recently I've been taking a couple of classes myself in the interest of wanting to know how other teachers teach, other artists teach. I haven't had a formal art education myself, although I have had some workshops. And I thought it'd be fun, especially, you know, in the Zoom world, to take a few classes and see what's going on out there. And I was pretty gratified to find that, you know, a lot of the things that I'm talking about, other artists are talking about too, and that we all have, you know, sort of different ways to explain things. But one thing I thought was really interesting was my own reaction as a student versus that as a teacher. So I saw a class that I thought was really interesting on digital, a particular digital art technique. Well, actually not even a technique, but this artist who works a lot in this digital format was offering this class, and I figured, okay, great, this is how I can learn how this fellow does his work. And it was wonderfully interesting to me because, of course, his class wasn't how he does his work. It was how he got, what the information was that he uses in order to do his work so that other people could therefore do something similar, but in their own style. And I realized that there is this disconnect. When you're a student, you sort of go to a teacher hoping that by taking a class or a number of classes, that you can sort of get inserted further along the process and that, somehow you'll be able to just start from there and go forward. Rather than what a teacher is usually trying to tell you is, look, hey, I can give you some shortcuts and I can tell you information that you won't have to go and find yourself, but you still have to do all of this work. There is no way that even if I held your actual hand and moved it in certain directions, I can't teach you to hatch. I can't teach you to shade a certain way. You've got to do it by yourself. And that also brought back a phrase that I had heard again recently, which was the only way out is through. So I bring this up because I think that I am very keen on teaching artists how to draw and paint in a very immediate way so that you can literally take a sketchbook and go out and sit down. And if you've got 15 or 20 minutes, you can get something done and you can feel like, all right, this is a good start. But I think part two of that is it's a good start. But the rest of it, the rest of learning how to do this requires you sitting down and actually taking it to the next level, and that includes doing a lot of things that don't work out. So I sat down last week. I was in the mood to do colored pencil of that gourd thing that I had shown you a couple of weeks back. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll do a step-by-step and then I'll show them how it went. And even though it's a few weeks later, it might be interesting. Well, I got halfway through it and I liked what I had done, but I had already made a whole bunch of mistakes. I was trying to do the watercolor underneath the colored pencil version, and I hadn't really thought it out. And so I'd gone too dark. So all of these places that I needed highlights were now never, ever going to be highlight. Then I tried to paint in gouache back on top of the colored pencil, and that really didn't work. And the whole thing, I just ripped it up. It wasn't even one of those ones you save. But it made me laugh, actually, at the time, because it was such a good example of how, as you experiment, you just have to keep trying. So there are two venues that I am actually attending these days, and I'll put this information in the PDF for you. But one is called London Drawing, and the other is Drawing America. And both of these groups used to do classes in person until the pandemic, and now they've got a really robust online drawing, I don't even know what you would call it, but all kinds of classes, life drawing, portrait drawing, still life drawing, and you pay a small amount, you attend, and it gives you an opportunity in the moment, to draw from a live model or that sort of thing, sort of like we did with Adriana a few weeks ago. And what's good about it is that, unlike a still photo like this, you do have that immediacy, and there's the time crunch, and you have to get it done. Some weeks it goes well, some weeks it doesn't. At the end of the class, I'll show you my little sketches from this last week when I did a Saturday session. But what was good about it was this business of I saw improvement. I've been doing this for a few months now, and I'm getting better at this business of having to do it on the spot. I've got more tools in my toolkit. And I think that is what Summer of Drawing is all about. I can't suddenly make you draw like I do or like any of the other people that we've been looking at. But I do believe that you've got a good toolkit now to start with. And you can definitely, I'm sure, without a doubt, sit down anywhere and sketch for 20 minutes under pressure. Since I've been making you, I never even give you 20 minutes. I've been making you do this over and over. But it's now time to get more serious. As the winter is coming up, and you'll hopefully have a little bit more time, I'm going to encourage you to watch all of these videos starting from the beginning, maybe just one a week, just like this, and do the exercises again, knowing what you know now, because you're so much further along than you were when we started this so many months ago, 18 classes ago. And you'll approach everything with a different eye. So I want to move on in just a minute or two to animals, because I don't want to not give animals their due. But I thought it was really important to get this feeling of action and clothing across. And I'm going to actually go ahead and move on now. I do have this image, which will be in the PDF, or if you're watching on the video, you can just stop and look at it for as long as you want to draw. I thought this was a really good action pose, where once again, you've got to make some decisions about what you're seeing, how many folds are needed to show this kind of action. I also thought that the background banner was really distracting, so that if I were to do this in color, for example, what color would I choose? Would I go for something neutral? Would I pick a complementary color, which would be maybe something in the blues and greens or something like that in the background? Would I just get rid of it completely? Would I even worry about having all of that extra movement back there? So that's pretty challenging. And that's one of the ones for when you've got a little bit more time to work on this. All right, animals. So we're going to talk mostly about dogs today, but I wanted to start off with cats. We were talking about planes and how the light hits a form and how artists use that to try to get across this feeling of cat, right? So we've got an ancient Egyptian cat over here, definitely boiled down to the essence, not showing fur and all of that stuff, but certainly showing the planes of the body and how the regal look of a cat. The sketch up here indicates a little bit of, fuzziness, but mostly once again is, the darks and the lights, and then the overall shape. And this wonderful sculpture down here, which I believe is French, shows a reclining cat. And this is more about the movement of reclining. So this is kind of like that folds thing where, yeah, you've got this feeling a little bit of fur, but you don't really have a feeling of fluffiness, do you? But you definitely have a feeling of reclining. So when you draw an animal, just like drawing folds, there's a story you're trying to tell. And that story is of, it's either of cuteness or it's of repose or it's of action, or it's of alertness. But once again, the fur, the furness, the furriness is just part of that story, just like folds are part of the story of drawing a person. So in this particular case, I thought this was really lovely. This was a fluffy dog, but the form and how the fluff sort of went along with the form, I thought was really marvelous. So there aren't a lot of strokes here, and that's really important when it comes to drawing animals. And the same with painting. The amount of fluff and such that you're showing, the less is definitely more. So in this particular case, the artist really concentrated on the darker areas of the dog, put the fluff there, but made sure his actual lines followed the form and followed the fluffiness. We definitely get the idea that this is a long-haired animal. So if you are drawing a lot of dogs and cats or whatever it happens to be, it is worth looking up what the skeleton looks like. It makes a huge difference to you understanding. It's not like you can't do it without. You don't have to have, scientific knowledge to be able to draw a dog nicely, but it really does help, doesn't it? To see sort of, how the rib cage is probably formed, how much of this on this retriever is probably fluff, how those hip bones kind of work, why there is that jutting out that there is right at the point that there is. Now, if we squint and look at this dog over here on the left, it becomes pretty obvious how we could get started, because there's a very obvious outline and there are some definite darks and lights. It's a little harder on something like this, where, where the dog's lying down, you don't really have a feeling of what's going on in the form, and there's a ton of fluff. So in a case like this, if you decide to come back later after the class to draw a dog like this, I would certainly look at this particular etching that I've shown here over here on the right for this whole example of less being more, that every single detail doesn't have to be in there. And if you want to show that gorgeous mane that's underneath on the chest, or some of the fluff on the ears, that kind of thing, then it's good to keep everything else at a minimum, so that you've got the story, which is beautiful fluff, that is prominent. Now, if that wasn't the story and it was more about the look in his face and all of that sort of thing, you would minimize the extra interesting stuff that's going on the fur to keep the concentration on the detail of his head and not have it go everywhere else. So this is why it's worth taking a moment to think about what you're going to do before you get started. Now, I looked to etchings rather than drawings to give you some examples to go by, because a lot of modern drawing of animals is far, far too detailed, because people are taking pictures with their cameras and then they are reproducing every hair. And that has become sort of like the thing to do. Whereas I think it's a lot more useful to look at the etching on the right, which is mostly about the planes of the animal with just a little bit of indication of some fluff. And the one over here on the left, which is definitely of that less is more category, where the dark and the light is emphasized, but where you actually have white fur just meeting the background. There are only just a few little hairs indicated. That's really important. So, and likewise, even when you're getting more fluffy, you can still keep it to a minimum. I thought these were both really great, especially the one on the right. I'm like, how long did that dog have to sit like that? So when you get to stuff that's really fluffy like this is where people's minds start to, the brain cells start to fuse, because that's my cat up on the left. I'm not sure who this little guy down on the right is, but same problem, right? You really have to sit back and go, okay, I've got to ignore the fluff. I've got to just squint and look for the shapes, look for the dark and light to start with, and then decide from there what's going on. What's interesting? Is it the form? Is it the face? Is it the stance? What am I trying to emphasize? So having scared you completely with that, this is the drawing exercise. We're not actually going to try to draw fluff in the next 15 minutes or so. But what I do want you to do is, using the concept of plane changes and light and dark that you see over here in this sculpture on the right, I would like you to try to draw this dog on the left. Now, this sort of brings in an awful lot of stuff that we've been talking about this year. Everything to do with angles, proportions, taking some time to get your measurements right. So we've got a good 10, almost 15 minutes to work on this dog. So while you're doing that, I'm just going to check the chat, and then I've got a few other thoughts on art to share with you. And just to let you know, somebody asked about the videos. Those videos are going to be up on YouTube for as long as I have a YouTube channel. I mean, they're going to live out there. It was actually a good benefit to doing this class to be able to record the classes and have them out there, because there are quite a number of people who are signed up for the class, but just simply, can't be here every week during the day, or their work schedule just gets in the way. And even during the summer, I'm sure, most of you have had one moment or another where you couldn't be in class and you could catch up. So I want these videos out there for as long as possible so people can encounter them and go through the entire series. But I do think there's a real benefit. I don't know if you've ever done weightlifting or anything like that, or come back and read a book that you read years ago and now you get more out of it. With weightlifting, you're given a sort of a routine to go through. And once you get to the end of, maybe you do a 12-week sort of program, you often start that exact same program over again, but you're stronger now. And so you can use heavier weights. And perhaps you add in a few more other exercises that you weren't sure how to do before, because you're not going back to zero. It's sort of a cycle, but you keep moving forward as the cycle goes on. And so I'm excited for you to start and look at that very first value and composition video again, because I know you'll be like, oh, I see so much more now than I saw when I did it the first time. And actually, hey, I already understand all of this stuff. And the drawing exercises you'll be able to do so much more rapidly and so much more succinctly, because it'll have become part of your drawing repertoire. So I think we have a bad habit of looking at our work that we have done over time and looking at past work and going, oh my gosh, that work that I did in the past is so terrible. Now, sometimes, like me, it was terrible enough that you just decided, all right, I'm done. But you've got work that you did years ago that, for whatever reason, you decided to hold on to it. And it has so much value, those pieces that you do hold on to, because when you look at them now and you say, oh gosh, that those eyes weren't quite right, and wow, look what I did to the fur when I did that, the fact you can see that is so great. That ability to self-critique and know what was not quite so great about older work and what you are now able to do and improve. That's exactly, that's the key to this, is that constant ability to improve. So when we think about artists whose work is so amazing now, we forget about their path. And there are a number of reasons that happens. One is that it's good marketing sometimes, for a gallerist or whomever to say, to sort of act as if this artist came fully formed from the half shell, like Venus. Ta-da! They had this innate, ability, this innate genius, and therefore their work is worth more because of that. The reality behind most really good artists is they got to be really good because they put in what painters call the brush miles, or I guess in drawing cases would be the pencil miles. They just did it, and even when they had to slog through it, even when things didn't go right, they did it again. They came back again. This is why I'm finding these drawing sessions where you can go to live to be helpful to me, because when I do have a lousy day, because maybe I was thinking of something else, or I didn't prepare my stuff before the class started, or whatever it happened to be, I know that that's not it. I don't go, oh my gosh, I'm giving up my entire career as an artist. Drama. No, I go, okay, that went badly. Why? Why did that go badly? And then the next time I'm like, okay, I know that if I've only got 10 minutes, 20 minutes, or whatever, these tools work best. I'm going to get right in there and I'm going to start looking for that contrast right away. I'm not going to try to draw the entire head in 5 minutes. I'm just going to maybe concentrate on the eyes and nose or something like that. So I give myself a game plan. So the same thing happens when I approach portraiture, because I don't sort of see my role in portraiture. I'm bringing out the person's personality, and of course, I'm trying to make the likeness accurate. I'm trying to tell their story. But in doing so, I want to look at all of the contributing factors that will help me, how the light falls on the subject, how the overall composition looks, how the folds are acting, how the colors are acting to sort of, reinforce the story. But at the same time, it's not a straight path. And I think this is difficult sometimes for commission clients to understand that when I send them a picture, early on in the early stages, it can look not like the person, because it won't look like the person until I'm done. And in between, there's all of this sort of assessing. You're putting down layers of color that you'll add more layers to later to make the color that in your mind, you know where you're going, you know where you're trying to get. You know that paint is being put in places where it'll be covered up by the paint that lays down beside it in future stages. You know that you don't have to be particularly accurate about the trees in the background, because when you go to paint the sky, you'll sort of neaten up how the trees look. So there are all these stages, and you learn about that by doing, by actually going through the process and realizing that, if those trees didn't look just right in the first pass on the painting or drawing, it's not the end of the world, because you're still in the process, and you'll be in the process until you're finished. And sometimes the process can go on a long time. Sometimes a painting or a drawing is put aside until you've learned something to apply to it. So I've got a number of paintings around here which I've stopped for one reason or another, because I knew that I could just finish them like they were, but I felt that there was some benefit to me learning a bit more about whatever it happened to be. One is sort of a dusk scene, and I was like, I'd like to do a few studies at dusk, little sketches, little paintings, and learn a little bit more about how I can not exaggerate, but sort of, add a little something extra to this painting that's going on. I've got another over here that I'm using a very different color scheme in, and I could just slam it out by going right back to my, color scheme I normally do. But I want to take a little time with this one as well to maybe do another couple of little color studies in that same color palette, just to see what else can be done. So getting to be a better artist requires this seriousness of purpose. And by serious, I don't mean like, oh my gosh, everything is horrible, angst, drama, all of that kind of stuff. But what I do mean is repeatedly being willing to come back to a subject, to something difficult, and to try to improve and to get better. But it isn't all only difficulty. We do have a tendency as artists to look at our work and find the faults over and over again. But isn't it true that sometimes when you put that work aside and come back to it a few days, a few weeks later, you're like, hey, that wasn't too bad. I actually did quite a nice job on that. And then over the course of time, you may still like that work, but now you see in it the growth that you had yet to make. And I think this seriousness of approach is something that is necessary, because we're sold on this idea, definitely in sports and that kind of thing. There's sort of the commodification of activities that say, hey, if you buy the right shoes, you buy the right tennis racket, whatever, you are going to be a star. You can go out and do all of these things. Now, I think we're a little more realistic when it comes to the physical activity, that isn't going to happen quite like that. But when it comes to art and many other artisanal practices like pottery, woodworking, making your own furniture, even growing your own vegetables, all of that sort of thing, there's still this desire to have it quickly, to not have to go through the months and years it takes to actually learn, and to enjoy that. So when people go, oh, I'm into the process and I'm enjoying the journey and all of that other stuff, and those phrases just kind of drive me nuts. But the truth of them really is that if you don't actually have fun, even when things are not going well, I enjoyed doing that colored pencil of the squash right up to the point where it just took a dive off a cliff, right? And so I'm like, okay, that was a few hours of I listened to a good book on tape and I was enjoying myself, and some of that colored pencil stuff went really well. I am going to reapproach that at some point in the future. I saved my little notan. And this time, I'm going to do that watercolor underlay better. I'm going to figure out how that should work. So there we go. There's enough philosophizing on my point. Let's go ahead and wrap up the dog. Let's see. So while you're finishing that up, I would say the same thing goes for classes and books and all of that stuff. I love the fact that I'm learning some new things. I love reading new art books and all of that sort of thing. But there is that tendency, and I suffer from it too, to think, oh, I've got this book on Sorolla. All of a sudden, I'm going to be able to absorb, what he did. Even if I sit down and copy a bunch of paintings, I'm not going to become Sorolla. But I will pick up enough information to go forth with. And so if you look at the books that you have, that you've probably accumulated already, instruction books and this, that, and the other, and you set yourself a course for this winter, for this fall and winter, and say, I'm going to do a self-study course on pick a subject matter. Maybe it's trying to find out how one artist approached their work, or maybe it's like, for me, it's going to be watercolor part 2, because I got a good start with my Tate watercolor manual from last winter, but I didn't finish it, and I'd like to finish it. So I'm going to go back and do that. That's going to be like every Sunday afternoon. I'm going to take the time, like I did last winter, to do my little watercolor course. So if you do that, if you choose to use the Summer of Drawing videos, to go back through and do this, I think that by the time you get to next spring, you will be so far ahead from where you started at the beginning of this year, by just having that time to absorb. I know you've improved in your ability to observe, but also to take on that level of seriousness that it takes to readdress topics, readdress assignments, go back and look at those images, and of course, email me. You can email me at erwhelan@gmail.com and tell me about your progress, and let me know if you're having any problems. Okay, we're going to move on from here. All right, so drawing folds and animals, just to recap. It's all about planes. Keep the folds and fluff to a minimum. Once again, observation and practice is the key to mastery. So you ask yourself, what's going on here? Why do the shadows fall the way they do? In this particular case, also add in there, how do the folds and the fluff and the fur contribute or take away from what I'm trying to say? Are they a distraction? Are they helping me out? How am I technically going to do it? Does it turn out that some media is better than others? And, like I experienced trying to put watercolor under colored pencil, is one of these media going to cause me a problem if I don't have a little more control over it? So in order to make a successful sketch or detailed drawing, we have to get the eyes and the brain working in coordination. So we see all those folds, we see all that fluff, we understand it's there, we understand why it's there. What are we, why are we trying to draw that dog? Is it because, he's got an interesting shape, he's dear to us, he's cute, he's beautiful, what is going on here? And try to get everything that you draw, the lighting and everything, to tell a story about that. And if you're not sure which direction to go, look at other people's artwork. With Google, with all the museums being online, you can look up art through the ages, through hundreds of years, to see how other artists approach particular topics and maybe get some good ideas. And I'm going to repeat Mike Hernandez's expression because I think it's so good. Totally applies to folds and animals. If you don't know what to do with it, get rid of it. If it seems obvious, keep it. All right. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. All right, everybody. And before we're at the end of the class, I just wanted to show you my own little sketches from this past week. I did a London drawing session. And so we did little warm-ups. I did some sketches just using charcoal and white charcoal and black charcoal. And of course, I got right in there and concentrated on the main bits. I worried about my angles, and I added a little, this which I had actually seen because I had been looking up stuff for you guys for classes. I had seen maybe there was the ability to put a little bit of shading in the background to help with the form. So then we did a bit of a longer pose. This was like 20 minutes or so. And in this case, I was determined to get back to that trois couleurs thing because I want to do a better drawing of Adriana, and I hadn't been able to find the time to do it. Luckily, I've been pretty busy this summer. So I did this one, and I found out that by starting with the sanguine color, the reddish color, and then adding the black and then adding the white, I got to a pretty good look of the skin tone. And then there was one time for another sketch, and this one I just did in charcoal and white charcoal, but I had a little bit longer time to go back in and double check my angles, get some of my darks back in there and that sort of thing. So I'm showing you those because those were sort of like the successful. That's how it looks when things go well. But there have been some weeks where, gosh, I just couldn't get the proportions right. I had my mind on other things, and I got in there with the eye and the rest of the face. I didn't have time for all of that sort of thing. So there are ups and downs, but I want to encourage you to pursue your own level of excellence wherever you are. Nobody can tell me anymore, oh, I can't draw a stick figure, because you can. You all drew stick figures when you were 3 years old. I know you did, 4 years old, 5 years old. You've done the stick figure. It's in the rear view mirror. The only way out is through. So just keep at it. We've got 2 more classes, and I have been waiting all summer to do these. The last 2 classes, it's all drawing media, and it's about memory and imagination. And I'm not talking about like fairies and goblins kind of imagination. I'm talking about how you find your style by using your memory and your imagination to get you there. We've got some great exercises to do, and it'll be a really good way to wrap up this summer. So thank you all. I'm losing my voice again. I'm going to stop. I'm going to go to gallery view so I can see everybody. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you being here.